My name is Ellie. When I was younger, my mom kicked me out of the house for her new family. It all started when she married stepfather. I was 14 at the time, and things between my mom and me began to change. I thought it was just a phase, that once the twins were older, everything would go back to normal. But I couldn't have been more wrong. To give you some background, my mom had me when she was only 19. My biological father was never a part of my life. She always told me that he didn't want children, and since they were just casually together when she got pregnant, he chose to leave when she gave him the option. She had no interest in asking him for child support, and he never offered any. It was easier for both of them to just walk away and never look back. Fully, my grandparents were always there for my mom. They helped her finish her education and find a stable job. Even though I never had a real father figure, I had a strong, independent mom who worked hard to provide for me. She dated a few men when I was younger, and when I turned 10, she started dating stepfather, a man she used to work with. Stepfather and I didn't think her a close bond, but we got along well enough. He wasn't my father, but he didn't treat me badly, and we coexisted peacefully. 6 years after they got married, my mom became pregnant with twins. Everyone was happy, including me. In hindsight, I should have noticed the signs that things were changing, but I was too caught up in thinking that my mom would always love and care for me. After all, we had been through so much together, and I couldn't imagine her abandoning me. But things weren't the same anymore. After the twins were born, I could feel my mom pulling away. She was irritable and distant whenever I tried to help or be around. I started keeping my distance, trying to give her space. But 2 months after the twins were born, my mom and stepfather called me into the living room to talk. They said they needed to have a serious conversation. I was just 17, still a minor, and had no idea what was coming. They told me that now with 3 babies, they couldn't afford to support me anymore, that it was becoming too difficult for them to manage the household. They said things were hard on their income, and that it just wasn't possible to keep me in the house along with the twins. I wasn't stupid. I knew they were bluffing. 2 adults, 1 teenager, and 3 babies should have been manageable, especially since both stepfather and my mom were working well-paying jobs as web designer. We had a comfortable lifestyle up until then, so I could tell they were just looking for an excuse to get rid of me. Even so, I tried my best to help. I suggested that I would get a job, if money was the issue. I was desperate to stay, but my mom and stepfather made it clear they didn't want me there anymore. Eventually, they kicked me out. I had nowhere to go and had to figure it all out on my own. I felt abandoned and betrayed, but I pushed through. I found a place to live, finished my schooling, and started working hard to make my own way in the world. And then, years later, when my life started to turn around and I became successful, my mom showed up again, demanding that I pay for my siblings' college tuition. She didn't even apologize. She just expected me to help because I was doing well now. I refused, and when I did, she hit me. It was as if nothing had changed. I couldn't believe how easily she had forgotten about everything. The pain of being rejected by my own mother came flooding back. It took me years to get over it, but I realized that I had done just fine without her. I had learned to survive on my own, and I was finally in control of my life. The years of hurt and abandonment had made me stronger, but I still couldn't understand how someone who had once loved me so much could turn their back on me so completely. In the end, I learned that family isn't always about blood, and sometimes you have to let go of the people who hold you back to make room for those who truly support and care for you. My mother once told me that, above all, she wanted to save money and resources for the kids who truly deserve them, referring to the twins. She didn't say that they needed it more than me, but she made it clear that they deserved to stay with her and stepfather more than I did. That was all I needed to hear to make up my mind. It was obvious I wasn't wanted there, and I realized that I had to leave. They hadn't even told me where I should go once I left. They simply nudged me in the direction of leaving. They knew I had enough pride to see that I wasn't wanted, so their plan worked. Technically, it wasn't even kicking me out in the way most people think of it, because they didn't force me to leave. But honestly, it felt just the same because they had backed me into a corner. I had no choice but to leave, and that's exactly what I did. The next day, I went straight to my grandparents' house. They weren't happy with what my mom had done, but they didn't cut her off either because they still wanted to be there for the twins. They were getting older, though, and I knew I couldn't depend on them for financial help. So, at just 17, I had to find a part-time job to support myself. I would see my mom and stepfather occasionally when they came to visit my grandparents with the twins, but they never really asked about me. Even when they saw me, it was all very formal. It was clear they didn't miss me at all. They actually seemed much happier without me living there. Even my mom was less irritable, which broke my heart. But I couldn't change anything about it. I stayed with my grandparents until it was time for college, but even then, my mom had no involvement in my life. I had to rely on a few friends to help me move into my dorm because my grandparents were too old to help me with that. I had to take out a student loan, but when I asked my mom and stepfather to co-sign it, they refused. They said the same thing as before, they needed to save their resources for the twins. Fortunately, one of my uncles stepped in and agreed to co-sign the loan on the condition that I promised him he would never have to pay it back. I worked throughout college to ensure I never missed a payment and could make a fresh start financially once I graduated. Throughout college, I had little to no contact with my mom. When I graduated, my mom didn't even bother to show up, and the only people there to support me were my grandparents. I was on my own now, and it was incredibly hard, but I kept pushing through. I didn't want to be a burden to my grandparents, so after graduation, I moved out and started working. The first few years were tough. I didn't make much money, and I had to balance paying rent, buying groceries, and slowly reducing my student debt while still saving for the future. It was a struggle, but I managed. That's when I truly understood what it meant to have a limited income. Thankfully, things have improved, and I'm not in the same financial situation anymore. Over the years, I worked hard to climb the ladder at my company. It wasn't easy, and it took a lot of time and effort, but today, I'm in a position where I feel comfortable. I don't want to bore you with all the details, but I'm proud of what I've achieved, especially considering how little help I had along the way. I've managed to build a good life for myself, and it's something I didn't expect, especially since I hadn't been in contact with my mom for years. Now that I'm almost 30, I'm working in CEO at the same company where I started. About 2 months ago, I was promoted to a position I never dreamed I would reach, and very few people knew about it because I preferred to keep it private. One of the few people I shared this news with was my uncle. I wanted to thank him for helping me out when I was struggling to pay for college by co-signing a loan for me. From what I gather, my uncle recently saw my mom and her partner, stepfather, at a family gathering. He mentioned my promotion to them and suggested that my mom get in touch with me to congratulate me after all these years. Although I'm sure my uncle meant well, his advice didn't go as planned. My mom didn't reach out with any warm congratulations. In fact, it went the other way. Not long after, my mom showed up at my house with stepfather, insisting on speaking with me. As I've mentioned before, after I started college, I cut off all contact with her. By the time I graduated, I realized that I couldn't keep hoping she'd come around or fix our relationship. So I blocked her on all my social media and cut her out of my life completely. Honestly, I don't think she even noticed. Since then, I haven't kept in touch with anyone in my family except my grandparents. They were aware of my feelings about my mom and never brought her up in conversation. As for my uncle, I didn't stay close with him either, so I had no idea that things had been tough for my mom and stepfather in recent years. I only found out when they showed up at my door, telling me how hard things had been for them. I let them in, assuming they wanted to make amends, but instead of offering any apology or words of support, they immediately started talking about my promotion. They were surprised I hadn't shared the news with them, and I found it strange. After all, it had been years since we spoke. They even expressed disappointment that I'd cut them out, as if their decision to distance themselves from me in the past wasn't a factor in my own choice to walk away. In the end, they didn't come to make things right. They came to talk about their own struggles. They assumed I owed them an explanation or even a connection. It was a lot to process, but it reminded me why I had distanced myself from them in the first place. They wanted to be there for their babies more than for me. They needed their time, money, and resources for their new family more than they thought I would ever need them, especially as a teenager. They told me that they expected me to be mature about everything and understand why their priorities had changed. But instead of feeling supported, I started to distance myself from them after I moved in with my grandparents. I didn't understand why they thought I should be okay with them kicking me out to focus on their new babies. It was like they didn't see how painful it was for me. When we finally met after so many years, they started by trying to make me feel like the bad guy. They acted like I should be ashamed for being upset about what had happened. They tried to make me believe that I was the one who didn't understand, and they didn't even give me a chance to explain how I felt. Instead, they quickly shifted the conversation to how hard the past few years had been for them. They talked about starting their own business, but how it had failed. Now, they were struggling to cover their losses and had to focus on providing for their twins, who were getting older and would soon need money for college. At that moment, I realized why they had reached out to me after all this time. It was because they needed money. They didn't waste any time making that clear. They even tried to make it sound like I owed them for not reaching out to them earlier because they were hurt that I had been doing well without their support. But they said I could make it up to them by helping pay for my siblings' college expenses. I couldn't believe the audacity of their request. They were trying to make me feel guilty, like it was a favor to let me pay for my siblings' college when I barely knew them anymore. I had left them behind in my past, and now they expected me to step in and fund their future? I told them immediately that I wasn't going to do that and that it was insulting for them to think they could manipulate me into something like this. I lost my temper and reminded them that they were the reason I had to pay for my own college. They refused to help me financially back then because they were focused on saving money for their new family, saying my siblings deserved it more than I did. I never questioned it. I just went on with my life, never bothering them after they made it clear they didn't want to prioritize me. But now, after all these years, they had no right to ask anything from me, especially not money. I told them they didn't even have the right to expect me to talk to them again. I pointed out that if they had saved money for their children's future, they should use that money now to pay for their college expenses, instead of trying to emotionally manipulate me. Then I told them I was done with the conversation. I had nothing more to say to them, and I asked them to leave. The interaction was over. It was incredibly naive of me to let them into my house in the first place, thinking that maybe they had finally realized their mistakes and were coming to apologize for the way they treated me for so many years. But as soon as I started telling them to leave, they got defensive and even offended. They told me I wasn't exactly innocent in all of this either. Their argument was that when we all lived together, I had been overly eager to get involved in their lives, to the point of being annoying. I couldn't even comprehend how they thought that was such a big issue. I was a teenager at the time, just trying to stay connected with my family as they drifted away from me. I didn't understand why they couldn't see that. Then they tried to guilt-trip me, saying that by refusing to help them now, I was just as bad as they had been. They said I was forgetting all the sacrifices my mother had made to raise me on her own, and that this was my chance to make it up to her by helping out. According to them, I was being ungrateful and disrespectful. It felt ridiculous for them to bring that up. I was just a child when all of that was happening, and I had no choice but to rely on them, even if I didn't want to be a burden. I still needed their financial support, and it wasn't like they were doing me any favors. Once they thought I was old enough to handle things on my own, they pushed me out of the house and essentially cut ties with me for almost 16 years. After all of that, how could they have the nerve to demand help from me now? The argument got really heated, and things turned personal. I ended up threatening to call the police if they didn't leave. Eventually they did, but my mother kept telling me about all the sacrifices she had made when I was younger, just to be a good mother. She said that there had only been one time in her life when she expected me to understand her situation and allow her to prioritize other people over me, and that I should have been more understanding instead of shutting her out for all these years. Now, she claimed that I was trying to make her out to be the villain, when really, I was the one in the wrong. This has been messing with my head ever since. I'm not sure if I'm the one who's at fault here, expecting too much from my mother, or if she's just trying to manipulate me. I'm pretty sure I'm right, but to be sure, I've decided to post on Reddit to get some objective opinions. So, Reddit, am I wrong for refusing to help cover the college expenses for my half-siblings because my estranged mother and stepdad are struggling financially right now? I've spoken to my uncle, and I told him that what he did wasn't right, even if his intentions were good. The situation I'm dealing with isn't the result of anything terrible that anyone did, but it's still been frustrating and stressful. If it weren't for the actions of a certain person, I wouldn't even be in this mess. Specifically, if he hadn't shared my personal details like my contact information and address with my mom without my permission, none of this would have happened. I was upset about that, but he apologized sincerely. He explained that he had no idea my mom would react the way she did. He didn't realize she was struggling financially, and if he had known, he wouldn't have shared anything about my life with her. He also admitted that it wasn't his place to talk to her about my personal matters. If I had wanted to work things out with her on my own, I would have, without him getting involved. Even though I was upset, I'm not planning on cutting him out of my life. I don't believe he meant any harm. If he had been acting with bad intentions, I would have been much angrier with him. But the truth is, he just made a mistake. On top of that, he's the reason I was able to go to college at all. No one else was willing to step in and co-sign my loan, but he did. Without him, I might not even be in college right now. I don't want to sound ungrateful to him, but at the same time, I'm not someone who lets people walk all over me. So I made sure to tell him that what he did wasn't right. I think I handled the situation fairly. Everything between us is okay now. I won't hold a grudge against him because, in a way, I think I needed to go through this for some closure. I also had a conversation with my grandparents about the situation with my mom. They agree with me that my mom's behavior isn't right. They're even planning to step in and try to get her to back off. My grandparents have always stayed in touch with my mom because they didn't want to lose contact with their other grandkids, which I understand. While they feel sympathy for the struggles my mom is facing, they don't think her actions toward me are justified. And I agree with them. Now, it's been almost 9 days since I last spoke to my mom. Since then, she's been sending me regular emails, reminding me of everything she did for me when I was younger. She sends these emails every few days, probably hoping to make me feel guilty or indebted to her. To be honest, I don't really understand her reasoning. She was legally required to raise me, and it wasn't as if she was doing me a favor by taking care of me. She did it because she had to, and she did it as long as it was convenient for her. But once I started becoming a burden or inconvenience, she and her husband decided to kick me out, claiming they needed to save money for their future and the twins. Well, that future is here now, and the twins are grown up, so it's time for them to handle their own issues instead of trying to guilt-trip me into feeling responsible for them. I've been ignoring the emails, but a couple of days ago, I received yet another one. I made the decision to respond to her, sharing everything I've expressed in this post so far. Naturally, she didn't take it well and immediately began calling me ungrateful once again. I calmly told her that she could call me whatever she liked, but it wouldn't change the truth, that she had been a terrible mother, which is the very reason I no longer wanted anything to do with her. After that, I blocked the email address she had been using to contact me, but she quickly created a new one and tried to reach out again. I blocked that one too. I'm going to continue doing this every time she tries to contact me until she understands that I won't keep wasting my time on someone who never cared enough to do the same for me. Honestly, I'm relieved that we're having this confrontation now. It's hard, but I know it will be over soon, and I'll finally get the closure I need. The only reason I even let her and my father into my home that day and spoke to them was because I was still clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, they had changed. I thought they might be there to apologize, to congratulate me, or to make things right. But as soon as I started talking to them, I was reminded of just how incapable they are of feeling true remorse, guilt, or shame. It was a wake-up call, showing me once again how selfish and manipulative they truly are. Now, I have no hope left for reconciliation with them, and I'm done. My mother showed up at my workplace earlier today, and honestly, it's probably the most insane thing she's done so far. Thankfully, I wasn't at work, so she left quickly, and whatever her plan was failed. I had taken the day off because I wasn't feeling well, and I'm so glad I did. If I'd been at work, I'm sure she would have caused a scene, tried to embarrass me, or thrown a tantrum. I found out about her visit when the receptionist called to tell me that my mom had shown up, demanding to see me and refusing to leave even after being told that I wasn't there. I was honestly scared when the receptionist said they were putting her on the phone with me because I had no idea what she might do. When she finally got on the line, I told her that I was at home, and I made it clear that if she tried anything disruptive at my workplace, I'd sue her so hard that, Not only would she never be able to send her kids to college, she wouldn't even be able to leave her house without facing extreme embarrassment. I made sure to sound as intimidating as possible, and it seemed to work. She quickly backed off and said that if I agreed to meet her in person, she'd leave my workplace. I told her she had no right to make demands of me and reminded her that I knew she couldn't afford to deal with a lawsuit. If things got ugly, my company would back me up, and that would be the end of it. I definitely wouldn't hesitate to take legal action if the situation with her escalated again. If things had gone any further, it would have been a completely different situation because they wouldn't be as understanding as I was. It would be much smarter for her to just walk away quietly without causing any more problems. After I said that to her, she handed the phone back to the receptionist, and I assumed she left the building. From that point, I didn't get any further calls or messages about it from my workplace, so I'm guessing she decided to leave. However, it was a very close call, and I can't afford for something like this to happen again. Because of that, I've decided to speak to a lawyer to understand what steps I can take to protect myself in the future. I'm not sure if what happened is enough to get a restraining order, as she hasn't directly threatened me, but I want to talk to a lawyer and figure out what my options are. Until then, I'm just hoping that this recent encounter was enough to make her back off and leave me alone. It seems like I don't need to worry about whether or not I should file for a restraining order anymore because after everything that happened, I'm pretty sure I have a solid case for it. Last week, my mother showed up at my workplace again, but I managed to handle the situation and got her to leave me alone. But after what happened just a couple of days ago, I think it's time for everyone to seriously consider filing a restraining order against her. When I came home from work the other day, I was shocked to see her standing outside my front door. I immediately told her that I wasn't in the mood to argue with her and that if she didn't leave, I would call the police. I even had my phone in my hand and was about to call when she suddenly ran at me and tackled me to the ground. My phone flew out of my hand, and she started physically attacking me while screaming at me and blaming me for everything that had gone wrong in her life. It was completely unexpected, and I was honestly taken aback by how crazy and aggressive she was acting. It took me a moment to react, but eventually, I was able to defend myself because I'm physically stronger and younger than her. Fortunately, my neighbors heard the commotion and called the police. They even came over and helped me by holding her down until the authorities arrived. When the police finally showed up, I decided to press charges against her, and she's in serious trouble now. I've also spoken with my lawyer and have filed for a restraining order against her. From what I understand, my stepfather has left with the kids and gone to stay with his parents. I'm not sure when or if he'll be coming back, but my grandparents told me that after he bailed her out that one time, she was charged with a misdemeanor because I wasn't seriously hurt in the altercation. Stepfather tried to talk to her and told her she couldn't keep acting like this, but she ended up getting into a fight with him too. I think she just completely lost control because she's been having a rough time and she can't seem to accept that I'm doing okay in my life. Honestly, she's the one responsible for the mess she's in, and I refuse to feel sorry for her. I'll have the restraining order in place soon, and I've also been thinking about moving to a bigger house since my income has increased. Now feels like the perfect time to look for a new place. I really hope that my mother gets the help she needs and can work on becoming a normal person, but it's honestly embarrassing to be related to someone like her. Even my grandparents have told me they no longer want to associate with her because she has been so rude to them as well. She only has herself to blame for everyone distancing themselves from her. But honestly, that's no longer my problem